read. This is Grown-Up Story Time. But the book that I'm reading from is Joel Arthur Barker's Paradigms, The Business of Discovering the Future. And I will be reading chapter 3 today. And then maybe doing a little bit of chat about it. But this is one of the books that I think has one of the best models for really understanding paradigms and paradigm shifts. That word has become quite popular, and oftentimes people don't know where that term may have come from. But Joel Barker has one of the best assessments of paradigms and how they shift. And this book is a business book, but I think it's very relevant for social paradigms. So, chapter 3. I'm reading from Paradigms, the book by Joel Arthur Barker, The Business of Discovering the Future. Here's kind of a reverse shot of it. It's an older book, so some of the references may be dated like to the 90s, but still very, very relevant for understanding how paradigms shift. And it, I think, transfers very well to the social paradigm. So it is one of the recommended books if you're really wanting to understand paradigm shifts and wanting to understand the role that paradigm shifters play in society and in change dynamics. So today I'll be reading chapter 3 and having a little bit of discussion. So here we go. Chapter 3, Defining a Paradigm. It's 20 cents, isn't it? When I began talking about paradigms in 1974 to corporate audiences, a lot of people asked me why I was wasting my time with such a strange idea. Most people didn't even know how to pronounce the word, much less define it. Most of the changes on the list in Chapter 2 were driven by a special phenomenon, a switch in paradigms. And in the jargon of futurists, they would be called paradigm shifts. The concept of paradigms and paradigm shifts can help you better understand the nature of those expected changes described in Chapter 2. Being able to understand what caused them will give you a better chance to anticipate other paradigm shifts. Today, paradigm is a buzzword and people use it loosely, but it is not a loose idea. What is a paradigm? If you look up the word in the dictionary, you discover that it comes from the Greek paradigma, which means model, pattern, or example. Let me give you some definitions that have appeared in various books since 1962. Thomas Kuhn, a scientific historian and author of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, brought the concept of paradigms to the scientific world. Kuhn wrote that scientific paradigms are accepted examples of actual scientific practice, examples which include law, theory, application, and instrumentation together, that provide models from which spring particular coherent traditions of scientific research. He adds, men whose research is based on shared paradigms are committed to the same rules and standards for scientific practices. Adam Smith's definition in his book, Powers of the Mind, is a shared set of assumptions. The paradigm is the way we perceive the world, water to the fish. The paradigm explains the world to us and helps us predict its behavior. Smith's point about prediction is important. We will see that most of the time we do not predict things with our paradigms, but paradigms do give us the added advantage of being able to create a valid set of expectations about what will probably occur in the world based on our shared set of assumptions. When we are in the middle of the paradigm, Smith concludes, it is hard to imagine any other paradigm. In An Incomplete Guide to the Future, Willis Harman, who was one of the key leaders at the Stanford Research Institute, writes that a paradigm is the basic way of perceiving, thinking, valuing, and doing associated with a particular vision of reality. A dominant paradigm is seldom, if ever, stated explicitly. It exists as unquestioned, tacit understanding that is transmitted through culture and to succeeding generations through direct experience rather than being taught. In The Aquarian Conspiracy, Marilyn Ferguson, who first made her name as editor and publisher in the New Sense Bulletin, writes, a paradigm is a framework of thought, a scheme for understanding and explaining certain aspects of reality. Let me offer my definition. A paradigm is a set of rules and regulations, written or unwritten, that does two things. One, it establishes or defines boundaries. And 2, it tells you how to behave inside the boundaries in order to be successful. And how do you measure success? For most situations, success is easily measured by your ability to solve problems from trivial to the profound. If you think about the definition, you should immediately get a sense of how widely it could be applied. For example, based on my definition, is the game of tennis a paradigm? If you think about it for a minute, you'll discover that it is. Does the game of tennis have boundaries? Of course, that's the easy part. The tricky part has to do with success and problem solving. What is the problem in tennis? It's the ball coming over the net, and you must solve the problem according to the rules of tennis. You must hit the problem with a tennis racket, not a baseball bat, or your hand or your foot. And if you hit it back over the net so that it drops inside the boundaries on the other side, you have solved the problem. And your successful solution becomes your opponent's problem. In a very real sense, you and your opponent exchange problems until one of you offers the other a problem that he or she can't solve. Tennis is a paradigm. All games are paradigms. The beauty of games is that the boundaries are so clearly defined and the requirements for winning or problem solving are so specific. Games allow for clear winners and losers. It is that aspect that generates much of any game's attraction. It is also that aspect that generally disconnects them from reality. Let us look at more important paradigms, like your field of expertise. Almost everyone has one, either at work or at home. You may be an engineer or a salesperson or a chef or a carpenter or a nurse or an economist. Are these paradigms? Again, let us apply the test. What does the word field suggest? Boundaries. How do you feel when you are outside your field? Not competent, right? Not competent to do what? Solve problems. Why do people come to you? To receive help from you in solving problems in your field. That sounds like a paradigm, doesn't it? Do artists have paradigms? I used to tease and say artists were just wild and crazy folks. Then I got straightened out by an artist. She came up after one of my speeches and said, "I'm a sculptor. What do you think the piece of marble I work with is?" I saw that it was her field, and then I realized she was going to work inside the field by chiseling into that block of marble. "Okay," I said to her, "but you can do anything you want with that piece of marble." "Not if I want to be judged successful," she retorted. And then she told me the rules of texture and form and balance and content that she had to follow in order to be considered successful. Since that encounter, I have begun to listen to artists talk, especially about the problems they have solved in their work. Whether it's a problem of perspective or of color or of tonality or of character development, artists have paradigms. In a sense, I'm constructing a hierarchy. At the top sits science and technology. That's where Thomas Kuhn focused. Science and technology deserve top billings because they are so careful with their paradigms in terms of writing them down and of developing measurement devices of increasing precision to tell whether they have solved a particular problem. And once a scientist has performed a successful experiment, it is expected that he or she should be able to hand the notes and the apparatus to another scientist who should then be able to replicate the experiment, getting the same results. We would never expect a tennis player to be able to replicate Boris Becker's serve by just reading his notes or using the same tennis racket, or someone to replicate an artist's work by being given the same pigments and paintbrushes and canvas. The requirements of reproducibility constitutes a very important difference between science and all other fields. It results in science and technologies having much more power to manipulate reality. But even though they are more powerful, if you apply the definition I offered to science and technology, you will see that it holds true. Over the years, I've collected words that represent subsets of the paradigm concept. Below, they are ordered on a spectrum ranging from challengeable to unchallengeable. You may disagree with my arrangement, but take a look at the words and think about the boundaries and rules and regulations for success that are applied in them. And it goes from challengeable to unchallengeable. The list is theory, model, methodology, principles, standards, protocol, routines, assumptions, conventions, patterns, habits, common sense, conventional wisdom, mindset, and then values. Frames of reference, traditions, customs, prejudices, ideologies, inhibitions, superstitions, rituals, compulsion, addictions, doctrine, and dogma. Please note that nowhere in this list of words is culture, worldview, organization, or business do they appear. That is because cultures, worldviews, organizations, and businesses are forests of paradigms. IBM is not one paradigm, it is a collection of many. That's true for any business. Large or small, they have management paradigms, sales paradigms, recruitment paradigms, marketing paradigms, research and development paradigms, human resource development paradigms. It goes on, but I'm sure you get the point. And there are even more paradigms in our cultural life: how we raise our children, how we deal with sex, how we define honesty, the foods we eat, the music we listen to. And the interrelationship of all these paradigms is crucial to the success and longevity of any culture or organization. That is captured in the word forest, a highly interdependent structure. As we know from the environmental paradigm, when one thing in the forest is altered, it affects everything else there. So when someone within your organization starts messing with their paradigm and says, "Don't worry, it has nothing to do with you," start worrying. It is never just one paradigm that is changed. A paradigm, in a sense, tells you that there is a game, what the game is, and how to play it successfully. The idea of a game is a very appropriate metaphor for paradigms because it reflects the need for borders and directions on how to perform correctly. A paradigm tells you how to play the game according to the rules. A paradigm shift, then, is a change to a new game, a new set of rules. It is my belief that changes in paradigms are behind much of society's turbulence during the last 30 years. We had sets of rules we knew well. Then someone changed the rules. We understood the old boundaries. Then we had to learn new boundaries. And those changes dramatically upset the world. In Megatrends, the bestseller in 1982, John Naisbitt reflects in an indirect way on how important paradigm shifts are. Naisbitt suggested that there were 10 important new trends that would generate profound changes in our society in the next 15 to 30 years. I believe that if you look for what initiated those trends, you will find a paradigm shift. What Naisbitt identifies for us in Megatrends is important because he shows us a pathway of change that we can follow through time to measure how we are getting more of something or less of something. But even more important than the pathway is our understanding of what instigated the change in the first place. We almost always find that at the beginning of a trend, someone created a new set of rules. The trend toward decentralization is an excellent example of a paradigm shift. The old rules, the old game required that we centralize the organization and make the hierarchy complex. But the game ultimately created big problems. Then somebody discovered that there was a different way to deal with the problems, which was to decentralize the organization and simplify the structure. In other words, to change the rules. The result was a paradigm shift. So if you want to improve your ability to anticipate the future, don't wait for the trends to develop. Instead, watch for people messing with the rules because that is the earliest sign of significant change. 4 questions. One of the difficulties I have with Thomas Kuhn's structure of scientific revolution is his insistence that paradigms exist only in science. In his afterword, Kuhn takes great pains to talk about all the disciplines as being paradigmic because they do not have the exactness of science. And yet, again and again, I saw the phenomenon he writes about in non-scientific settings and situations. Then I realized that a key element is one of the most powerful examples, then I realized that a key element in one of his most powerful examples was not scientific, but cultural. A simple deck of cards. The cards were used in a scientific experiment to prove that people have great difficulty perceiving red spades and black hearts when they are intermixed with standard cards and flashed very quickly at an observer. But even though the experiment was scientific, the objects of the experiment, the cards, are cultural artifacts. And that expectations about the correct color and cultural expectations, not scientific expectations. So the experiment was actually a measure of the power of a simple cultural paradigm, the card deck paradigm. to set up boundaries that dramatically influence the way the subjects of the experience saw the amalgamous cards. I am convinced that what Thomas Kuhn discovered about paradigms is a description not just of science but of the human condition. When we look back to the 1960s, we see non-scientific paradigm shifts. Parents responded so violently to drugs and long hair on their children because these things represented a cultural paradigm shift. We missed the OPEC revolution because of an economic paradigm shift. Our country's inability to understand the Iranian Revolution had to do with religious paradigms. Much of the confusion we have about the future is because of changes in paradigms. These paradigm changes are especially important for all of us because whether it is in business or education or politics or in our personal lives, a paradigm change by definition alters the basic rules of the game. And when the rules change, the whole world can change. The points that Kuhn makes about scientific paradigm shifts are true for any situation where strongly held rules and regulations exist. I should also add the following disclaimer. I doubt very much if Kuhn appreciates the extent to which I and others have generalized his concepts. In his book, he states only in science where the rules and examples and measures are precise can paradigms exist. He also contends that only with the subtlety and accuracy possessed by science can changes in paradigms be measured so as to trigger the search for a new paradigm. I accept the obligation imposed by Kuhn's own careful qualification. In spite of his argument to the contrary, I still believe that his observations can be applied in a broader sense with great utility. I hope you will find this true as well. To frame this broader discussion, we will ask 4 questions about paradigms. 1, when do new paradigms appear? The question is all about timing. If we can know when the new rules are going to show up, then we can anticipate our future with much greater accuracy. Timing may not be everything, but it's a great place to start. 2, what kind of person is a paradigm shifter? It is as important to understand who are the paradigm shifters, the people who change the rules, as it is to know when they show up. Of the 4 kinds of paradigm shifters that will be described, 3 are already in your organization or in your community. But typically, we do not understand how to use them to our advantage. In fact, we usually are very hard on these people. 3, who are the early followers of the paradigm shifters and why do they follow them? I call these people paradigm pioneers. Without them, paradigm shifts take much longer. Paradigm pioneers bring the critical mass of brain power and effort and key resources necessary to drive the new rules into reality. Very few of us can be paradigm shifters. Many more of us, if we understand our roles, can be paradigm pioneers. And 4, how does a paradigm shift affect those who go through it? It is crucial to answer the last question if we are going to understand why there is so much resistance to new paradigms. It also explains the great gulf between old and new practitioners. When we've answered these 4 questions, we will have identified the paradigm principles. And this is the end of chapter 3 of Joe Barker's book, Paradigms, Anticipating the Future. And a couple of things I want to point out that were really significant in this. This set of principles about how paradigms shift, I feel overlays perfectly on the social paradigm. So when he's talking about business and organizations, I would refer to individuals and communities of people. And being able to understand who the shifters are is important because these are the people that really begin to change the rules. This is before it becomes a trend. These are the people that are really good at anticipating what the future rules need to be and who are really good at sparking trends, but usually they aren't the ones that are sought out. Their expertise and their ability to be able to see and anticipate the future much sooner, usually that's not how it goes down. Early in the chapter it says, we're in the middle, when you're in the middle of the paradigm, it's hard to imagine any other paradigm. As you get closer to the end of the paradigm, it's much easier to see the paradigm. And I think we're living kind of in that place that all of a sudden the rules for doing life have changed. You ain't got to get up and go to work. You know, you can just put your nice shirt on and go sit in front of your computer and be able to do work. Or lots of things like that, you know, where the very rules for society are changing. 20 years ago, nobody would have thought about being able to have mass exodus from the physical workplace to be able to work at home. But if individuals were able to predict that, companies, they would have had a very leg up on it. But now, as we're getting closer to the end of that paradigm, why do I have to get up and go to work anymore? The rules of getting up, going to work, commuting, and all that, like those rules are playing out. They're becoming irrelevant. What are the new rules? The new rules say I should be able to have a better work-life balance. And part of the way that I do that is not commuting and going into offices and sitting around people that I may or may not enjoy spending that much time with. Those are rules for how we do the work paradigm. That is changing. The way we do information. I went out today and I got so tickled because I'm still a, wired in earphone kind of person. And I laughed and I thought, you're at the very end of this paradigm, where everything, the ear pods and things are going. No more wires. Nobody's doing wires anymore. And so even that technology paradigm is a dying paradigm. I know phones, I'm an Android person, but I know there was, they make changes. And at one point you could no longer plug in like earphones into an Apple phone or what have you. So those are paradigms that we see changing. But also, what's happening in Africa? Burkina Faso and Niger and Mali have decided that they are going to take control of their resources, or they're going to withdraw from using the CFA franc. That's huge. It's huge. The rules are changing. The economic paradigm for those countries is changing. The resource paradigm, countries coming in and taking the resources at a very small rate, and the profits go to those countries instead of staying resident within those nations. And we are seeing the very paradigms shift. We're seeing the rules change. No more of that. We're going to cancel all your contracts. You're not coming in and taking these resources. These resources are going to benefit our people in our country first. They're going to help us build infrastructure or create the revenue to be able to build infrastructure. And we're going to use them. We're going to use our natural gas. We're going to use all of our resources that we have. And then if we have some left over, we'll sell it to you. Maybe, if we want to. Totally different paradigm. For Africa, the economic paradigm, the power and control paradigm, we're seeing it change. The rules are fundamentally changing. That the military juntas would take over from leaders that they consider to be puppeteer leaders of the West. Them actually doing it and thwarting the assassination attempts in war. Like, take the political piece out, just look at what's happening. That is a paradigm shift. I don't care what side of it you're on. I don't care what you believe, what your political affiliation. If we're talking about examples from society of what paradigm shifts look like, those are some really good examples happening in real time in our life. The other thing says the beauty of games is that the boundaries are so clearly defined. Social paradigms aren't that clearly defined, but in a general sense, in a very broad sense, we know who the winners are. We oftentimes know on a cultural basis who we deem as winners. The old paradigm, if you got money, big house, fancy cars, certain life privileges, that was considered to be winning. That's what everybody's goal was. And it's, again, broad brush, not everybody. But as that paradigm is changing, there's a problem, because these younger people that aren't necessarily interested in going and working 40, 50 years underpaid, where they can barely get off the hamster, like you make just enough to be able to survive, but never enough to thrive. Like, we're not doing that no more. That isn't considered winning anymore. And so we're seeing that paradigm change. The work paradigm, the idea of going and working for a company for decades and then retiring, and they, of course, take care of you in retirement. Like, that's not a set of rules that we're seeing, especially the younger generation take on. So social paradigms, winners aren't oftentimes so easily defined, but if you look in a broad brush, we do. We know who we assume to be winning. And then he talked about organizations, but it would be communities. They're forests of paradigms. In my life, there's a whole bunch of different paradigms that play out. The economic paradigm, the paradigm of culture, my physical proximity and the culture of that. And so these communities are often interdependent structures. If you change one thing, the other areas are also affected. It says, even more important than the pathway is our understanding of what instigated the change. What happened? What happened that prompted the rules? Usually folk get sick and tired. I'm tired of doing this way. It's not working for me. I'm burnt out. Something's got to give. Something's got to give. Fannie Lou Hamer says when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, usually crisis is what begins to shift the paradigm. But the general dissatisfaction, oftentimes paradigms begin to shift when it becomes too painful to stay in the old paradigm, to stay in the old set of rules. We're seeing that in the workplace like no other time that I've been alive. And then as that begins to happen, people start searching out a different way to deal with problems. Different way to deal with problems. What are the areas where you see people starting to use different ways? One of them that I see is the housing market. People are all of a sudden very interested in much smaller houses. The McMansions is no longer the picture of winning, probably because the utility bill is ridiculous, the taxes are ridiculous, the upkeep is ridiculous, and people are struggling economically. And so having that much square footage is becoming an old set of rules, an outdated, irrelevant kind of mindset, and sometimes not even the picture of success. And people are moving to smaller footprint homes or leaving the country. I'm a part of that. There's lots of movements of people that are expatriating or immigrating to other countries for a lot of reasons, and a whole lot of them good. I'm one of them. And so those are paradigms. In my upbringing, the paradigm was never to have left the country, to go live. We'd go on vacation. Now, we've done vacations, we did some of those things, but like to actually pack up and leave the country to a country that speaks a different language. That was not a paradigm in my family. Nobody else in my family didn't left the country. They haven't, the rules of success weren't that. It was you have a house, you have a good life and you got a pension. Those were the paradigms of my family's upbringing. And so for me to go against that, to do something different, the rules, new rules, nope, no boundaries. I'm going to go wherever I want to go. No boundaries by country. I got a passport. I got the capacity to be able to get a visa so I could go and stay gone. So that is a paradigm in my life that shifted. Rules changed. The rules changed. The way I lived changed. I had a house and a business and a car. I don't have a car anymore. I don't want a car anymore. I can hire a driver for $8 an hour to take me wherever I need to go, or I can get on the bus or the light rail train for 30 cents. So my paradigm, the very rules of what is successful, I'm winning. Got my little bus card, I go load $5 at a time, and I am winning. The rules of what makes me win have changed. Now, if I got money on my bus card, I'm winning. Versus, I got to have reliable transportation to be able to get where I need to go because that wasn't an option where I lived before leaving the country. So the very set of rules in my life changed. The economic rules changed. I still use US dollars here, but the economic rules change. I go buy stuff and they say 25 cents or 50 cents, and I'll say, I just need 25 cents worth, like literally. And I hand them a quarter, which is an economic paradigm. My economic paradigm changed. My housing paradigm changed, which partly was economics. My cultural paradigm changed. My food paradigm changed. So these are interconnected things, and one thing affects the other. It's like we really are connected. It's this interconnected web of existence. And so a paradigm, when it changes, the very rules, the basic rules of your game changes. The game of life, the rules change. And when the rules change, that's our greatest potential for change, for cultural change. And then he begins to talk here in later chapters. He'll do a little more talk about shifters. And he's going to talk a little bit more about who those people are in society, but that those are the ones who are going to get to the solutions fastest. That you're shifters, but we don't do community and change in isolation. And so he talks about, and he'll talk about this more in later chapters, the paradigm pioneers, that the shifters and the pioneers oftentimes work together. The paradigm pioneers usually bring to the momentum the critical mass. Hard to get something moving with one person, one lone shifter or two lone shifters. But the pioneers are the ones that oftentimes have the resources. Sometimes change takes money, new ideas, new innovation. Even if it's innovation in thinking, it takes money to be able to do development work. But getting to the critical mass Well, there's enough people saying thumbs up on this, let's do a different way. And the financial resources in general. And he talks about what the shift really means. And really, he's talking about that space between the old and the new way of doing things. And so he'll go into that more in detail later in the next chapters. The full chapters, we've done 1 through 3. And both the story time and the commentary are over on my YouTube channel. So if you go to the bio, you should be able to find them. If you can't, send me a message and I'll just send you the link, because that sometimes is easier than me trying to tell you where it is. But if you find my YouTube through the link in the bio, it's on there, and I'll be uploading this one too. So chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3 are on there. Chapter 1 was watching for the future. 2 was the importance of anticipation. 3 was defining a paradigm. And then the next chapter that I will do will be when do new paradigms appear? Because again, we're talking about paradigms usually begin to appear before the trends. The trends is when people catch on and go, oh, this is a new popular thing. This is a new way of doing life in a new way. Once it's a trend. But your paradigm shifters are usually the ones that identify the problems as they're beginning to happen. And that's the precursor for a new paradigm to appear. But Joe Barker's talking about anticipating. If you can figure out where the paradigm is going and anticipate it, doesn't that give you opportunity to prepare for it before it happens? So this is about getting into a proactive stance of anticipating the future. How do we proactively shape the future versus just reactively fighting the fires of society? And so part of my premise is, if we were to use these principles for our social paradigm and be able to do a better job of anticipating, we could help shape the future better. And so that's what this is really all about. If we're trying to build community, we're trying to build communities for the future. Not just be reactive to what ain't working in the past. What do we want the future to be like? And so being able to get on the front side, the proactive side, just seems logical to me. If you're trying to figure out how to prepare and take people on a bridge to the future, shouldn't you kind of have an idea of where that future is going? Which direction are you taking it in? And so part of that is the premise behind that. So understanding this paradigm model, I think, is really valuable if you're looking at if you're trying to figure out how social paradigms work, if you're trying to figure out the movers and players in society, which ones are going to get you to change and which ones are going to keep you from change, or be the slowest ones to get to change. This provides really good information for that. So highly recommend this book. It is one of the favorites, and that's what I'm doing, kind of reading some of the favorites that are real critical in the social tech work curriculum that I have. We've got a collection of tools specifically for leaders, paradigm shifters and pioneers who are leaders, helping to guide us to the new paradigms. So highly, highly, highly recommended. This is on my short list of books everyone should understand the concepts behind. It would highly, highly help us as we begin to do the work of trying to steer the future. We're trying to re-pioneer society. We're trying to do that in the future so that we can plan for it and find solutions that begin to take us there. So thanks for letting me share. This was chapter 3 of Paradigms, and I'll see you again for the next chapter. Thanks for joining in. If there's any questions with anybody that's still in the room, feel free to put them in the chat or punch the box to come up. Any questions, any insight that you got, insight about paradigms or alternative understandings about paradigms. What did you understand paradigms to be? Have you used that word before or heard it used? And did you really understand some of these details about really what paradigms are and how paradigms operate? It's become a buzzword, but oftentimes without really understanding that there is a real process to paradigm shifts. And I have found it really beneficial to understand that process. So any questions? I'll give anybody a minute or two if there's questions or comments or feedback. If not, y'all have a good evening. Thanks for sticking around and listening.